And it's like jazz. It's like the way jazz is central to American music, and people keep saying, well, it's just jazz, you know, and it keeps coming back and back.
Right.
That's the way the detective story is. And the reason is just what you were describing, is that it's such an American thing to do, to take a situation of absolute chaos and solve and bring it into order through the force of a single mind, you know. Ernest Hemingway said that all American fiction comes out of Huckleberry Finn, and I maintain that not only does it come out of Huckleberry Finn, it comes out of one scene in Huckleberry Finn where Huck says, I don't care if I will go to hell, but I will help my friend Jim, the slave, escape. And what's so amazing about that scene to me is that Huck doesn't say, I don't believe in hell. He doesn't say there is no hell and forget it. He says, I'm going to hell, but what I feel, the way that I order the world, my moral universe, I'm going to obey that moral universe. I'm going to live in that moral universe, even if it's not God's. That's such an American thing to say, and it is what the private detective in the great detective story says. He says, I've come into a situation of absolute chaos. My order is going to be the order that it takes. My code is going to be the code that I act on. Sam Spade does it when he sends Bridget O'Shaughnessy down. He says, this is why I'm going to do it, and he sets out the rules of his behavior. It doesn't matter who else's behavior it is. And that's why the critics are so often aghast when a Mike Hammer walks into the room, when a Dirty Harry comes into, oh my, you know, oh, he didn't obey, he didn't read him his rights, he just shot him, he, you know, he broke, you know, Mike Hammer breaks off a relationship with a 45, you know, oh, and women, you know, they mistreat women and all this stuff. But they misunderstand that what you're seeing is a radical act of integrity and a radical act of individualism, and that to me is what American fiction is about. It's not about Gore Vidal's clothes, it's not about how well somebody puts his elegant sentences together. It's really about a moral universe coming out of a single human being, and I think that that is what the detective story is about, and that's what I was trying to get back to with Dynamite Road, and one of the reasons that it really, you know, was so exciting.
It is just wonderful to go back. You know, one of the things I always find fascinating is that the West ended in California.
Yeah.
And the detective story, the classic American PI, that's where, you know, when the frontier closed, it's a natural transition from the Western to the PI story. In fact, if you really want to go back, it's Natty Bumppo, and, you know, there's a whole, all the way through the 19th century, you know, and it can be a guy working inside the law, but more often it's a paladin. More often it's somebody, I think of the movie because I was a kid, and you know, things that you see as when you're a kid, just like the music.
Yeah.
I can still sing on Blueberry Hill with Chubby Checkers, you know, but I can't do them. It's so amazing how you're imprinted forever with your music from like high school.
Yeah.
But I can still remember Shane. Now, what a classic example,
Great.
you know, of
Great.
Alan Ladd writing in, and you know, there was Jack Palance in his first, you know, all in black, and then when I remember when I read Lee Child's The Killing Floor, I want to tell you, it's just like Shane reborn. Guy rides into town on the bus, and you know, the whole thing was, and you know absolutely that he can't marry the girl, and he's going to have to ride off into the sunset. You know, he came alone into the town. He restored order in the face of, you know, complete chaos. He kept his moral compass. You know, he loved the girl, but he's going to move on because that's his mission, you know, kind of thing. It's so Western.
You know, and the commentary, you know, I set Dynamite Road in San Francisco for exactly that reason, and one of the things that I was thinking about was San Francisco was such a good place for the tough guy detective for the exact reasons you're talking about, that it was wild, it was a frontier town, it had that sense that anything could happen. And at the same time now, San Francisco has turned into the hub of political correctness. It's turned into the place where you can't say this because it offends that, and you can't say this because it's no good for that. And so I wanted to just throw two guys, you know, Weiss and Bishop, into that mix, who are just like bombs, you know, just like dropping an atom bomb on that. They don't care what anybody thinks, and they don't care who they offend, and they don't care what it's, you know, what the social mores are. They just are going to be, they're going to live by their own code and their own inner life. And that's, you know, I thought a lot about where to set this book, and I came up with San Francisco for just those reasons. Just
absolutely. Somebody said to me not long ago, it's a phrase I truly love, said California's been taken prisoner by the fascist left. I think, oh, isn't that true?
It's so terribly true, although now we have the Terminator, the Governor in there, maybe he'll blow it apart.
I understand. You know, it's so interesting to me because I went to Stanford and I was there at the switch because I was from 58 to 62, and that was really, the whole world changed. The end of the 50s into, you know, the war
Right.
And by the time I finished graduate school and left, and I made a deliberate decision to leave California when the war was really heating up in the mid-60s now, because I realized it was never going to be the same again.
Yeah.
You know, by now we'd gotten the, you know, Haight-Ashbury and all, and San Francisco really has gone through extraordinary, because when I went there in 1958, it was a white glove, you know, hat, high heel. We went to the opera as freshman town. By the time I left, it was beatnik, and it was, you could see it all coming, and it was the most extraordinary change.
Yeah. Yeah,
and I think California has always had that tremendous dynamism. It seems to sort of be on the forefront of, you know, the cutting edge of American culture, whatever you want to call it. The change so often seems to come out of California.
It does, and wash backwards. I find it sad, though, I have to say, this fascist left that you talk about, and this kind of narrow-mindedness of what can be said. What I find so terrible about it is its view of the imagination. Its view that the imagination is sort of an empty box, and whatever goes into it comes out of it the other side exactly the same way. Where in fact the imagination is much more like the digestive system, is that it turns imagery into the things that the mind needs, you know, and it feeds on a lot of different things. And you know, I loved, like a lot of boys, I read the scene in I, the Jury when Mike Hammer blows that girl away. I must have read that 50 times, you know. And here I am, a man who hasn't lifted a hand in anger in 30 years, you know, and you know, my own children have never felt so much as a swat, you know, and yet that scene meant so much to me about what it meant to be a man, because my imagination translated it into a parable of integrity and individualism, and standing up for yourself even against someone you love. And I think that when you deny people those images because you think, oh, they're going to go off and shoot girls and they're going to go off and be violent toward women, you're really denying them the expression of that imagination that frees them from those impulses. You're doing exactly the wrong thing. And so they go off and play video games, and you know, you find the boys blowing each other up on video games. And I just feel that that's just a terrible sin, especially against the male imagination, which does tend to be a more violent and hostile one, you know.
There is an almost distinctive California voice, especially among women writers, which I have begun to find truly annoying. I'm looking, you know, at tons of manuscripts and all, and I can almost tell without looking at the front page to see where they're from, that there's almost like a straitjacket of political, as you say, that overlays an awful lot of books that are written by Californians, and especially California women. And I want to like take a sledgehammer and break on the concrete. So I'm glad you said that, because sometimes I think it's only me.
No.
And I don't have a prejudice. I mean, I lived in California, love California, but I do find it's a current mindset that's extremely annoying.
But it's just as bad in New York, as far as I'm concerned. In fact,
in a different way.
It is different. In New York, there's an edge of hysteria to it now that I find.
That's because they don't know what to do. I mean, I think it's a real floundering. I don't think California is quite so, you know.
Well, California is always beautiful, so even if you don't know what to do, it doesn't really matter.
Well, it's an interesting time. It's a time of tremendous consolidations, and, you know, publishing, which is basically a creative industry dealing with artists, has been taken over by people who are accountants and who are pressuring bottom line. And some of the goals they have, which I hear about all the time from people in New York for books, they're simply impossible. I mean, there isn't any way that you can get the sort of double-digit increases in readers and do other things. And say what's happening is, and this was part of my discussion I mentioned earlier with the Wall Street Journal, who wanted to know what has happened to the PI novel. You know, is it dead? You know, why is it we're seeing you know, what he was under the impression was, or had been told, is that cozies were the only real popular form of crime fiction at the moment. And I said, no. I said, this is a marketing thing. It's easy to market a cozy, you know, by which we mean in America primarily cute. In the British sense, cozy means a traditional mystery. It means P.D. James or Manette Walters, whom no one in their senses would call cute. But in America, it tends to be a book where you can slap a cat on the cover, or you can put, you know, a pair of legs and fancy shoes. You know, I don't know if you've noticed, but the chicklet, the whole thing with chicklet, you know, is legs and shoes and whatever it all is. So there's that set of labels. They're easy to market. There's a particular audience for it. On the other side, you've got the big thrillers, and they too have, you know, they're easy to market. There's, you know, a niche for them.